The first thing to bear in mind is the CDC's role in your practice. There are a number of states, including Arizona, Georgia, South Carolina, and many others that have adopted the CDC guidelines into the Dental Practice Act. This means that the CDC standards are actually law in your state. And in states where it's not specifically incorporated into your Dental Practice Act, please know there are probably sections that refer to safe and sanitary conditions and other standards of care that would reflect on the CDC. In addition, OSHA looks to the CDC when enforcing part of its bloodborne pathogen standard. Not so much from the patient perspective, because we know that OSHA is concerned about workers only, but let's face it, as healthcare professionals, we know that when we have a safe environment, it's a win-win for team members and patients alike. On your screen, you'll see a QR code. If you do not have at least a summary of the infection prevention practices in dental settings from the CDC, I would highly recommend that you grab this QR code and download it for your practice. You may already have a full copy of the CDC guidelines for dentistry, and that's fine as well. You may not need this. But nevertheless, it's important that you have these on hand because these should be an important aspect of onboarding new team members and for calibrating the team. So that way, when you find you're doing something differently than a team member, let's look at the CDC guidelines as well as the manufacturer's instructions for use so it can be calibrated and all standardized throughout the practice. So no matter what your role is on the team, it's important that we all be aware of what the summary of the infection prevention practices say, or have a copy of the full guidelines. They serve as your best reference no matter what role you play on the team. This screenshot shows us a cutout from the CDC summary guidelines. And on this screenshot, there are 5 key administrative recommendations for dental settings. These are important recommendations to have implemented, regardless of whether the CDC guidelines are law in your practice or not. These are the standard of care. First is to develop and maintain infection prevention and occupational health program. You have the basis of that when you start with your OSHA binder, and in particular, the exposure control plan. But do you have any infection control policies? Next is being able to provide the supplies necessary for adherence to standard precautions. You may recall that the CDC standard precautions are what drives patient safety and worker safety. The third administrative recommendation is to assign at least one individual trained in infection prevention that's responsible for coordinating the program. Certainly attending this course is one avenue for being trained. I would also recommend that you consider other outside sources, such as being a member of the Association for Dental Safety. Fourth is developing and maintaining written infection prevention policies and procedures. They are part of your program that we mentioned in number 1. Your policies and procedures in infection control can be as extensive as you prefer. They can be outlined by topics such as how do we sterilize instruments? How do we handle a boil water alert? How do we handle workplace illnesses? It could be very specific or it could be more general in nature. That will be up to your practice to decide how detailed you'd like to be. And fifth, that your facility has a system for early detection and management of potentially infectious persons at the initial point of patient contact. What does that mean? Let's take a step back to the pandemic for just a moment. Do you remember when we were screening our patients and we were only allowing one patient practically in the office at a time, or at least having them sit in their cars before they could come into the office? While our protocols are not as extensive now that we're post-pandemic, it's important that you have a system for screening patients, even if it's simply just through your patient appointment reminder, giving that patient the gentle reminder to let your office know if they have any respiratory or other contagious illnesses. That's one way of screening and having an early detection system in place. Well, infection prevention begins with hand hygiene. The picture that you're looking at here shows an illustration of all the areas that we typically miss when washing our hands. And the areas on the back of our hands and along our wrist, we miss many, many areas. So please be mindful that when you're washing your hands to be very thorough, whether using soap and water or hand sanitizer. Because we know that people will frequently touch their nose, eyes, and mouth without even realizing it. And these germs can get into your body through your eyes, nose, and mouth, and they can make us sick. So bear in mind that if you've touched something in your operatory that has not been cleaned properly, or you lean on the counter in sterilization where it's really a dirty counter, now you may have contaminated your hand, and next thing you know, you're touching your face, your nose, your mouth. So this brings the question, exactly when do you wash your hands? Well, the CDC has identified these 6 times that we need to wash our hands. First thing when you come in the morning, before eating, after using the restroom, and when they're visibly soiled. Those 4 times you particularly need to use soap and water when washing your hands. And as we saw in the last picture, take careful consideration and be mindful of washing the back of your hands and wrists as well. Before gloving and removing gloves is an ideal time to use hand sanitizer. We know that hand sanitizer is fast, it's easy, it dries quickly. Hand sanitizer is quick and easy, it dries fast, making it more easy to get our gloves on. Now, here's an example of something I'd like to share with you. And I strongly recommend that you use professional grade soaps and sanitizers in your practice. Some of the obvious reasons include that many of the over-the-counter products have wonderful smells and fragrances in them that we enjoy at the holiday times, right? But please know they can create allergies, or you may have an existing allergy, and in addition, they may not be compatible with your gloves. So save all the wonderful smelling fragrances for your patient restroom or at home, but not in your operatories in the dental practice. Sometimes we buy our soap in refillable container sizes, and therefore we're refilling individual containers in your operatory. And I want to bring your attention to the fact that this soap bottle has been refilled with 2 different kinds of soap. So it's obvious that this is now contaminated. One of the best practices if you're refilling soap bottles in your practice is to let the bottle become empty, rinse it out, let it dry overnight, and then refill it. There are some types of bacteria that can grow in the soap inside the containers if we're not taking care to wash the container. In addition, when you reuse containers, the pump lid can become very contaminated over time, can become very dingy and dirty looking over time. So please be sure you're cleaning that as well. Patients are paying close attention to the details, and the devil in this detail is making sure that we're having clean and sanitary hands because patients are watching us.
Thanks for watching. Strengthen your dental team skills even further by heading to the next video. See you there.